Our reporter, Ode Francis, tells us more.
This year, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, has chosen responding to the trafficking of children and young people as the focus of the World Day.
So today we are marking the UN Day Against World Human Trafficking, and one of the major themes that we are doing today is to responding to victims of trafficking. That's for children and young people.
This year's campaign highlights the fact that almost a third of trafficking victims are children.
With strategies, with interventions.
Through its Sexual Offences Act, enacted in July 2006, which prescribes penalties that are sufficiently stringent and consummate with those for rape. However, the law is not yet widely used by prosecutors. The Employment Act of 2007 outlaws forced labor and contains additional statutes relevant to labor trafficking.
Well, human trafficking is reality, and it is a big problem because it's traffickers that are stealing from us our labor. What is the most important, what we have is our labor. We can build the wealth and richness and development of our country based on the labor. And traffickers, they take young people, they take young women, young men, children, and they exploit them. They make money on them. We need to stop it.
In 2013, the General Assembly held a high-level meeting to appraise the global plan of action. Member states also adopted resolutions and designated July 30th as the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons.
We're working with also the actors. When I talk about actors, these are people who are involved directly. Children, because they have been a victim of trafficking for quite some time, because they don't have somebody to speak for them. We're working with both the county and national government to ensure that they are all involved in the fight against child trafficking.
In October 2007, police in Malindi arrested an Italian on suspicion of human trafficking, facilitating child prostitution and drug trafficking.
So we have a shelter ambayo inasaidia minors wasichana. So below the age of 18 and above the ages of 7. We are able to give them assistance when it comes to our shelter.
2 children trafficked to Tanzania for forced labor were rescued by Kenya officials and placed in a children's home.
Okay. Let's work together to ensure that gaps that have been identified in this program, interventions that have been proposed in this program, that we work together to ensure that we reduce numbers of child trafficking.
Section 14, 15 and 17 of the Sexual Offences Act 2006 prohibits the facilitation of child sexual tourism, child prostitution and forced prostitution. It also prescribes penalties of 6 to 20 years imprisonment that are sufficiently stringent and consummate with those prescribed for other serious offences.
Okay.
Prosecutors, however, rarely pursued cases under these provisions of the Act. For Ebru TV, I'm Ode Francis.
All right, now to delve deeper into the topic at hand is Evans Munga, Program Director for African Network for Prevention and Protection Against Child Abuse and Neglect, and Winnie Mutevu, Program Officer for Awareness Against Human Trafficking. Just to get the titles proper, I saw you whispering, I'm not the director. So who's the director? Where is the director in your playing? So what are your proper definitions before we kickstart this interview?
Well, so you're meaning I introduce myself?
Kindly.
Great. I'm Evans Munga, like you said. I work for an organization called ANCAN, regional office. That is African Network for Prevention and Protection Against Child Abuse and Neglect. All right. The program manager.
My name is Winnie Mutevu, working for Heart Kenya, a project officer.
All right. Now, I'd like us to quickly get right into it. For the benefits of our viewers, maybe we can start by highlighting what exactly human trafficking is.
So the best summary I can be able to give of human trafficking is just the movement of people, meaning men, women, and children, for the purpose of exploitation. So there's an intention of you moving them from one point to the other location.
All right.
Yeah.
And you can also, just to have us saying, for children, there is use of force, coercion, you can say, for purposes of exploitation, yes. But for the that's for the adult. For children, they don't have consent, so they can be, you know, given a few promises, gifts, and all.
All right,
Yeah.
which is quite sad. Now, with that said, can we just now take a look at the different types of human trafficking?
Yeah.
All right.
So we have two major ones. It's either adult trafficking or child trafficking. It's just that now what happens when it comes to exploitation, it might be for forced labor, where it's adults being used for labor, not being paid, or being maltreated, or just going through different difficult situations whereby their rights are being violated. And for children, we also have child labor. We also have sexual exploitation for prostitution, pornography, nude pictures, organ removal. And right now we also have the issue of violent extremism, where you're being trafficked for violent extremism, or even for begging, child marriages. So it depends with who is trafficking and the need they need you for.
And the purpose, she like to say, it depends who is trafficking and what's the intention. There are so many emerging cases of trafficking, like the coast we have sex trafficking that is on tourism, and especially in Nairobi in the streets for pegging and you know, domestic workers.
Okay, you have mentioned what I wanted to ask next, which is how exactly does human trafficking work? If possible, you could even highlight for us some of the examples of the worst scenarios that you've seen being in that particular sector and handling these cases almost on a daily.
So I'll say it's a process when it comes to human trafficking. So there's always the issue of someone being recruited. And then when it comes to adults, you'll either be lied to, you'll be forced, or someone is going to abduct you. So there's always a reason to show that these adults moved from one point to the other because the ABCD happened. So they might have been able to give consent, but they might have been lied to, and then they end up being exploited. A good example I'll give is what we've been hearing a lot in our mainstream media, where we have Kenyans being taken to the Gulf countries, they're being used for labor in people's homes, sexually exploited as well in those homes. So it just depends with who is taking you and what they're taking you for. But for children, simple things like child marriages, employing your child or a child as a domestic help, to herd cattle, working in mine areas, at construction sites, all that qualifies to have a child to be called a victim of child trafficking.
They can be also used for purposes of radicalization, child searches. Like she said, it's the process. There is the process of recruiting, harboring, transportation, and also now the end game, this is exploitation. And many times, that's why we are saying there are some gaps. In terms of awareness, they need to know from point A to point B what is in between. If it's a child from, say, from the rural Kenya promised to work in Nairobi or for purposes of taken to school, they need to know who, what it means, and how are they going to benefit. Because working for money because of poverty as an underlying factor, I think it's wrong. It needs to be discouraged.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, now that you've mentioned that working for money because you're in a poverty environment, into suffering from poverty, is wrong. How then will you advise the people, everyone who's going to the Gulf countries, as you said? The reason why they go there is because they need to support each other, and some of them even need support to their family. And then things go wrong, and it all ends up being human trafficking. But even as you may go all out and try and create awareness, the number of people who still want to go to these Gulf countries are many. It's massive. So where is the loophole, and how do you solve this problem?
Well, to start with, and I think you've rightly said, the government is now doing a lot in terms of vetting the bureaus and other recruiting agencies for people working in the Gulf countries, so that these agencies are vetted, they're known, they're registered, they know how many people are they taking, what kind of jobs, who are the employers, what are the requirements, so that it's scrutinized, so that it's known that when this person goes to this other place, if anything happens, they're able to contact their families back home,
or even the embassy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one. Two, we need to have laws that regulate all these processes, but also giving, for example, child trafficking have a lot of awareness. Like I usually say, child trafficking has never been considered as a child protection issue, which is a huge gap. Awareness is one of them, and also the element of coming up with partnership for the government and the civil society organizations, just to carry out researches and find gaps, so that we come up with interventions, programs that address these gaps.
All right.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about that more. We'll be looking at more of that when it comes to martyrs policies and what the government is doing as we wind up the interview.
Yeah.
But as for now, how is it that, how would you say, what type of environment that does one have to be in for them to get lured into child trafficking?
So when it comes to trafficking, generally anyone can be trafficked, whether you're rich or poor, wherever you're coming from, anyone can be trafficked.
Really?
Then we have, because they'll
Okay,
promise
you need to explain
Let
to
me
me,
explain
Winnie,
how it
the
works.
rich part, because most of the times people assume
Yeah.
human trafficking is all about those
Poverty.
who are in an unfortunate situation, or those who are in a poverty area or environment. So by you mentioning rich, clarify kindly.
So when it comes to traffickers, they can promise you education. So you're offered a scholarship, you're going to get a good education. But then as you get to the destination, it's not an education. Either it was a pimp trying to lure you to get you there, or even someone marries you off, and then they turn you to be a prostitute in your own home. So you'll be used to sleep with other people, or even be used to sleep with animals and such like situations. So you'll find anyone can get lured into it. You even have cases of people who sharing of professors who are trafficked into these situations. So, but you'll find that there are those who are more vulnerable to it. Yes, those who are poor, the IDPs, the refugees, and children as well, because of the issue of consent. And so you'll find, when it comes to trafficking, generally anyone can be trafficked, but for sure, you have those groups that have a high likelihood of being trafficked. But then you'll find sometimes awareness can help. You're able to reduce the risk by getting the information, knowing the questions to ask, knowing where to follow up when it comes to the government structures, even when it comes to organizations, where do you go to seek for help or to ask questions. So that sometimes can reduce the risk, but that does not mean that it will never happen. So if it happens, what next? So we have such existing organizations like Heart Kenya and Can Marked and all those people who are there at the commission today in Mathare, to just share on when this happens, where do you go to? Where can you be able to get help? You're not to blame when you have been trafficked. Because what you find is there's a lot of stigma. Also when you're trafficked for sexual purposes, you'll find you can't come back and share, or you've gone abroad and then you come back without money, no one is willing to accept you back home.
Okay, and my very quick question, for the children, it's very easy to know that this child has been trafficked. But at what point does an adult know, by the way, I'm in a bad situation, I have been trafficked as well?
Well, for an adult, there is some torture. That's part of the exploitation. We are given hard work. You promised that you are going to work in a high-end places in the Gulf. And while reaching there, you are given restrictions, and then you are given some limitation. You are not supposed to communicate. You have some communication guides that are confiscated. At times, you are abused. So that's the point you realize, yeah, I've been used.
Winnie, let me just come to you. I've listened to what Evans has to say, but most of the times when it comes to martyrs trafficking, people who fall victim are women. Yeah. And so when it comes to a woman, even as you talk about the sexual, being used for sexual needs, or even being beaten, I mean, we've seen horrible cases, organs being taken, you've seen horrible cases of people being burnt. Yeah. So as a woman, once, especially now when you're raped, as an African woman, there's that part of you that wants to shy away. You feel very awkward and you get embarrassed because you do not want to tell anyone out there.
You die inside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even when you're beaten, especially for those who go to the Gulf countries, even when they're beaten, they feel like maybe that's my right. I need to be beaten. So how do you convince? Because this now is mental torture.
Yeah.
So from woman to woman, I want you to explain to me how exactly, look at the Evans is smiling, how exactly do you convince someone you need to step, regardless of the amount of money that you're being given, walk away?
So we've handled more than 400 cases right now when it comes to victims of human trafficking in the organization. And for sure, the biggest number, it's women who are reporting the cases. Not to mean that men are not trafficked, it's more of the reporting issue. They're not reporting as much as when it comes to the women. But then looking at the patriarchal system that we have in most of the countries, women have always been put in a place where they don't really enjoy most of their rights. So they're still fighting for them. But then you'll find most of them, for sure to talk about, they've already gone through abuse back at home. You are already raped, you are not being paid anyway, you are still being treated back at home. So when it comes to some of these cases, they'll be like, the only challenge I have is not being paid. I was anyway going through all the other challenges that I'm going through right now, apart from just being paid my money. So some of them will come back and still go out there in other countries just thinking maybe the country was the problem, not the situation. So yes, we have some, but again, unless they agree to get assistance, you can't really help an adult. So it just comes to them understanding what you're talking about. And then I think a challenge you've faced is when you're talking about justice and rights and people understanding what is abuse. My reality is different from someone else's reality. So I'm just telling them that this is not right for you to be done. They're like, what do you mean by it's not right? It has happened to me all over since I was born up until now. So that has been a thing where most people, because they've gone through these harsh situations in their lives growing up, they don't really think trafficking is such a bad situation. It only becomes bad when I'm not being paid to most of them.
All right, and just moving on from that, Kenya has a lot going on when it comes to human trafficking. But before we get there, from where you see it and from what you know, what are the notorious destinations for traffickers?
According to the media, the Middle East. From our data, what I'm saying the media is because it is majorly reported. It's the Gulf countries, majorly, which is people hear of. But when looking at the data that we're getting when it comes to the victims, it's all over. Because you'll find most countries in the world, they're either a source country, a transit, or a destination. Whereby Kenya is both. At least the three things. It's a source, transit, and destination. You'll find most of the countries looking at Europe, the America, they're destination countries. So it just depends with where you're being taken. And you'll find some of the countries, it's more sexual exploitation, others it's more forced labor, but within the country, all those things are happening. In our major cities, in our rural settings, all these things are happening. So it happens everywhere. It's human beings who are doing this to other human beings, not a destination, not a country. It's just, we've become animals as human beings.
It's across the
just
world.
to add on that, I mean, the U.S. State Department released a report on human trafficking just recently. And to Kenya, we are doing badly in terms of having structures, improved on how we are handling cases, reporting, prosecution, and all that. So we are in tier 2, meaning that we are still in the blink in terms of handling human rights where child trafficking falls. So there are certain gaps that we need to work on as a country. When I talk about as a country, you don't look at government. You and I, we are government, so we need to address the issue of reporting. Because I can tell you for now, if you want to quantify some of the statistics that are being pounded on the media and other organizations, there's still a huge gap. Quite a number of cases are happening, but go unreported.
All right.
Yeah.
And to just give the statistics, Kenya is a source, transit and destination country for men, women, and children subjected to forced labor and sex trafficking. To give an example now, children from East Africa and South Sudan are subjected to forced labor and sex trafficking in Kenya. So kindly expound on this.
Well, Kenya, in terms of our economic per capita, it's considered one of the countries that is doing well in the region. So children and people in the region, they find themselves working here. A case on point, recently we saw the Department of Children's Services trying to clear some children who are used as beggars in the streets. That's a form of trafficking because they are exploited for purposes of some people to get trade. And there are cases whereby, like I was in Moyale recently, some of the children moved from Ethiopia to Kenya in search of cheap labor because the economic standards and all, because of the pull and push factors like poverty. So Kenya, considered doing well, which I doubt, is considered to have been a destination and at the same time being a source. So that's one of the reasons why we have quite a number of trafficking being hounded to this country.
All right. In addition to that, according to your research, 33% of children are trafficked for sexual exploitation due to laxity of the law. Now, can we critique this nation's law when it comes to this preposterous act?
Well, the Counter-Trafficking Act needs to be supported with other laws. So there is some gap in the legal legislation that we admit, but also there is a need to strengthen the prosecution angle so that it serves as an example for those traffickers to be able to share with.
So the punishment needs to be more harsh.
Exactly. So and also the issue.
You don't agree?
I don't think it's not harsh enough because we have, if you're found guilty of being a trafficker, you'll be jailed for 30 years or a fine of 30 million. And if you repeat, it's for life. So I don't think it's not really harsh enough. It's just that it has not been implemented. So,
and enacted as well.
Yeah, so you find once you're found guilty, they'll majorly use the Sexual Offences Act. So they look at the final act. Was it for sexual purposes? Then they use that instead of using the Trafficking Act, because it's a process. Whereby, again, there are many challenges because evidence is key. And if you don't have the evidence, then you can't convince the judge that actually you were trafficked or not. So I think it's more just, if it was to be implemented, I think it would be perfect because it's one of the best laws that we have when it comes to trafficking.
Yeah, you find a child who's been trafficked, they look on other peripherals, you know, things that needs to be looked at with other laws, but they don't focus on what is it, especially on the exploitation, so that they can use the Counter-Trafficking Act that is in place. So yes, enactment and implementation needs to be
That is where the loophole is.
Yeah.
So, okay, so my last question to you is, at what point will we feel like the government or even the bodies that you've come from, at what is the goal from Heart and Upkind? What is the goal when it comes to human trafficking at the end of the day? Is it to make sure justice is served, or is it to slow down on trafficking, or so what is the purpose from where you guys sit?
Well, from where we work as an organization, first is to create awareness that yes, this menace is existing and all of us need to be involved. When I talk all of us, means port government, the county government and national government, the media, the civil society organizations. The children need to be sensitive so that they know their rights, so that they are able to detect, respond, and also be part of it. And also to be able to ensure that we have partnerships that are working. Existing structures need to be, you know, addressed and enhanced. We also need to have statistics so that we are able to come up with programs that are implementable, that are addressing the need. So as we speak, we may not have statistics that are really able to give us a program, not really a program that quantify how many, from when to this point. So yes,
that you can get moving
centralized data to support programming on child protection issues, number 2. Number 3 is that we need to come up with some awareness campaigns going on, not like taking advantage of the UN human trafficking and come up with some sound bites. This needs to be addressed right from the grassroots up to the national level, what we call as a bottom-up approach, as opposed to top-down approach.
All right, thank you. Winnie?
Yeah. I would say we've been doing this since 2010, doing a lot of awareness within the country. But then, like any other crime, you can't really end a crime entirely in the whole world. So it's the aim for us is to reduce the issues of human trafficking. And given it's an internal issue whereby someone can be trafficked within the country or transnational, where be taken from Kenya to another country, it needs efforts from all governments. We're able to work together, because how else will we be able to get traffickers who are exploiting Kenyans in other countries? It's us working together with other governments.
Especially the rural-urban migration.
Exactly. So it's us looking at how best can we be able to work together to create a safety net for our communities, for our children, so that this menace can come to an end better. Let's say reduce, because coming to an end might be something which is a bigger goal.
All right.
Yeah.
And your theme this year was to respond to young children and young
people.
Trafficking, yeah.
Why?
Yeah, because they have been found to be, just like you've used the word, victims. Especially children, they have nobody to speak to. Adults can speak for themselves. Children, they don't have anybody to speak to. Yes, we need to have responsive mechanisms, responsive measures, and also create awareness among that kind of cadre. That's the children and young people, because they are the most vulnerable spheres in our community.
And very quickly, my director is going to kill me because we have run out of time, but very quickly, how do you plan on doing that? How do you plan on working hand in hand with the theme at hand?
So we have, like Handcan Regional Office, we have a program that we're implementing, the porous borders in Marsabit, to be specific, Moyale bordering Ethiopia and Kenya, Mandera, that's Somalia and Ethiopia as well, We have Busia, which is bordering Uganda, and also Nairobi, because it's the destination, considered a destination. So we are with support from the Terrorist Homes Netherlands, the funding, and we are working with other organizations, the grassroots, to ensure that we have structures in place to raise the level of awareness, to identify gaps in terms of policy, in terms of prosecution, in terms of partnership, so that we come up with programs that are able to address the issue of interventions and awareness.
All right. Well, thank you. Any last words?
I'll say there's hope.
Right.
We have people who are working on these things, so don't give up.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasant interview. Hopefully our goals shall be reached, because human trafficking is something that if it has not affected you directly, it has affected you indirectly. Everyone knows someone who's gone through this situation.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a very sad matter. With that, I'd like to say goodbye to my guests this evening. So let's take a very quick break. And when we come back, we have more news.